What if the man you thought was the heart of Hollywood was hiding something far darker than a movie script could ever imagine? What if the very estate where When Harry Met Sally was once screened for elite guests became a grotesque stage for a double homicide, and something even worse beneath the surface? Because on a quiet Sunday morning in Brentwood, California, something unspeakable happened. And by the time the sun set over the Reiner estate, two bodies lay butchered in a mansion worth $13.5 million. Rob Reiner, icon, director, activist, dead. His wife Michelle, a woman praised for her warmth and philanthropy, stabbed multiple times. But the real twist? That wasn't even the worst thing investigators found. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Buried behind the pristine guest house, nestled near a manicured garden, was a forgotten structure. A dredge, out of sight, out of mind, until police opened it. What they found inside rattled even the most seasoned detectives. Now let me ask you this. Have you ever seen a family story unfold in reverse? Where the climax comes first, then slowly, horrifyingly, the backstory reveals everything you missed. Because that's exactly what this case feels like. And trust me, once you hear what was really going on behind those Brentwood gates, the whispers, the documents, the bones, you'll never look at Rob Reiner the same way again. Let's start at the beginning of the end. The Sunday that changed Hollywood. It was supposed to be an ordinary morning. The Reiners weren't scheduled for any public appearances. No red carpet events. No interviews. Just a quiet day in one of Los Angeles's most exclusive neighborhoods. But by 7:43 a.m., neighbors were calling 911. Why? Because screams had been heard coming from the Reiner estate, followed by the sound of something being dragged across stone. Minutes later, Romy Reiner, Rob and Michelle's 27-year-old daughter, arrived in a panic. She had allegedly been trying to reach her parents for hours. No response. She used her emergency gate code and entered the main house. What she saw? Well, Romy hasn't spoken publicly yet, but according to early reports leaked to the press, she found her father and mother lying on the kitchen floor, blood pooled beneath their bodies, the knife still embedded in Rob's chest. But here's the twist. Police say Romy's first words to dispatchers weren't screams. They were a whisper. "You need to look at my brother. He's dangerous." Who lives in the guest house? Just steps away from the scene of the crime stood a sleek, modern guest house, fully wired, fully furnished. It was the residence of Nick Reiner, 32. A failed screenwriter to some, a troubled genius to others. He'd been living on and off in the estate's guest house for over a year, following his third stint in rehab. Paparazzi rarely saw him. Neighbors claimed he never left the compound. When police entered his unit, he was there, calm, covered in scratches, and reportedly said, "They never loved me anyway." Let that sink in, because at that moment, it seemed like an open and shut case. Angry son, fractured family, alcohol, rage, tragedy. But again, that wasn't the real horror. The dredge that shouldn't have existed. When the property was being secured, a curious officer noticed something strange on the rear blueprint of the estate. A small rectangular shape, labeled Old Dredge Access. No one in the Reiner family had mentioned it, but there it was, buried near the tool shed, camouflaged by shrubs and vines. With the Reiner murders already declared a crime scene, officers investigated the structure. It took 2 hours to break the lock, and when they opened it, they found remains. Multiple, decaying, mummified, stacked. This wasn't a panic burial. This was curated. The LAPD has yet to confirm the exact number, but internal leaks suggest at least 3 bodies were discovered. None matched Rob, Michelle, or Nick. Which raises a question you might already be asking. What else was Rob Reiner hiding? Why this isn't just a celebrity tragedy? Let's pull back for a moment. This isn't just about one Hollywood family. This is about a brutal double homicide, tied to a discovery so vile it shocked even hardened homicide detectives. It's about layers of silence, legal, emotional, and institutional. And it's about how power and legacy can conceal darkness in plain sight. We know Rob Reiner as the man who gave us Stand By Me, The Princess Bride, and A Few Good Men. But what if behind the director's chair was a man struggling to control a son with demons? A man who made impossible choices? A man who, perhaps, allowed things to happen that no one should? Or worse, what if Rob wasn't the protector? What if he was the enabler? Or the architect? The Reiner legacy and the cracks in the facade. To understand what happened in that house, you need to understand the Reiner family from the inside out. They were Hollywood's royalty. Rob, the son of comedic legend Carl Reiner. Michelle, the quiet pillar of his world. Nick and Romy, their children from two different worlds, one shaped by privilege and pain, the other by idealism and distance. Publicly, the Reiners were progressive champions, donors to liberal causes, voices for the voiceless. But as one insider put it, they gave money to fix the world, but couldn't fix what was happening in their own backyard. What the public never saw. Sources say this wasn't the first time police had been called to the estate. There were incidents, screaming matches. A gardener once quit, reportedly after seeing something in the garden he couldn't unsee. A housekeeper went silent after signing a strict NDA. Still, no official records tied the Reiners to any crime. No lawsuits. No charges. Why? Because some say they were protected. Powerful friends. Expensive lawyers. Carefully constructed PR strategies. But now, none of that matters. Because you can't hide a dredge full of bodies. Why now? Why this moment? We've seen Hollywood scandals before. Meltdowns. Cover-ups. Tragedies. But this is something darker. It's a story that forces us to ask, how well do we really know the celebrities we idolize? What secrets can hide behind fame, money, and public image? And what happens when a family finally collapses under the weight of its own silence? Because here's the thing. As horrible as the double murder was, it might not have been the beginning. It might have been the final act. And that's where we begin. What you're about to see isn't a tabloid drama. It's a forensic journey through the fractures of a famous family. A real-life thriller filled with whispers, secret journals, missing employees, and DNA matches no one saw coming. We'll dissect Nick Reiner's twisted past. We'll unlock Michelle Reiner's private journal entries. We'll retrace the chilling contents of a script Nick wrote before the murders, one that mirrored the crime in terrifying detail. And yes, we'll return to that dredge. Because what they found inside didn't just answer old questions. It raised new ones. Questions that lead deeper than anyone expected. Mini cliffhanger ending. But as detectives sifted through the rot and bone, one thing became chillingly clear. Rob and Michelle Reiner weren't the first to die on that estate. And they might not be the last. What would you do if you walked into your childhood home and saw your parents lying in a pool of blood? Would you scream? Would you freeze? Or would you immediately suspect someone you'd grown up with? Because that's exactly what Romy Reiner did. The 27-year-old daughter of Hollywood royalty didn't even hesitate. Her voice, reportedly calm but trembling, echoed through the emergency dispatch system. "It's my brother. He's dangerous. Please hurry." But what happened in the hours leading up to that moment? How did one of America's most beloved film families become the center of a double homicide investigation? And why? Despite the chaos inside the house, did something in the garden startle officers even more? Let's rewind to that Sunday morning, when everything began to unravel. The calm before the slaughter. It was early. Too early for anyone in Brentwood to be awake unless they were training for a marathon or walking a designer dog. Sunrise had barely broken the horizon when the first unusual sound was heard from inside the Reiner estate. Not a scream, not a cry, but glass, shattering. One neighbor said she thought it was a bird flying into a window. Another claimed she heard a man's voice shouting nonsense. No one called police yet, but by 7:40 a.m., all of that would change. The arrival of Romy Reiner. According to multiple sources, Romy had been trying to reach her parents since the night before. Her calls went unanswered, unusual, but not alarming. She arrived at the gates shortly after 7:30 a.m., used her personal code, and entered through the side walkway. What she found inside the kitchen has not been officially released, but insiders close to the case say Romy found her father collapsed against the counter, his body limp, slumped sideways onto the floor. Michelle was face down near the kitchen island. One of her hands had a defensive wound, slashed. She had fought, and then Romy saw the knife. A heavy, curved blade still buried in Rob Reiner's chest. Blood, everywhere, on the granite counters, on the floor, even dripping across the refrigerator door, as if someone had leaned against it before collapsing. Now pause for a second. Can you imagine that scene? Your parents. Gone. Murdered. The house you grew up in transformed into something out of a psychological horror film. But Romy didn't run. She didn't scream for help outside. Instead, she whispered, "You need to check the guest house. He's still here." The guest house confrontation. When officers arrived, Romy led them, still in shock, to the path behind the estate that led to a sleek modern guest house. Designed for privacy, soundproofed, surveillance-free. Nick Reiner's domain. A tech-savvy, secluded fortress where he reportedly spent most of his days writing scripts, playing late-night music, and, according to Romy's statement, spiraling. Police knocked. No answer. They drew weapons and forced entry. Inside, a quiet scene. A single lamp still lit. An open laptop. Headphones on the desk. An unfinished screenplay titled Inheritance. Nick sat on the edge of his bed. Not restrained. Not panicked. Just sitting, shirtless, with dried blood along his arms. One officer asked him to stand up. Nick's response: "It was bound to happen." The knife, the study, and the shattered frame. After Nick was detained, detectives began processing the main house. That's when something odd surfaced in the study. It wasn't blood or a second weapon. It was a shattered photo frame on the floor. One of the few signs of a struggle beyond the kitchen. The photo inside. A family portrait. Rob, Michelle, Romy, and Nick, standing apart from the others. The glass had broken outward, suggesting it hadn't just fallen. It had been thrown, possibly at someone. On the desk, Rob's favorite leather-bound planner. Inside, a page was torn violently from the ring's spine. What was written on that missing page? We don't know yet, but forensic analysts say the torn marks were fresh, likely ripped during or immediately before the murder. Why would someone take a single page from a private planner during a murder? What was so important on it? The blood trail that went cold. Crime scene investigators found a faint blood trail leading from the kitchen toward the back patio door, but it stopped abruptly. Not smeared, not interrupted, just gone, as if someone had cleaned it, or walked through a hidden passage. Cops began combing the grounds. That's when one officer noticed something strange by the garden. A subtle line in the hedges, like a path had been opened and reclosed. And that led them to the discovery that would turn this from a family tragedy into a full-blown mystery. The dredge appears. Behind the ivy wall, adjacent to the vegetable garden Rob had proudly shown off in past interviews, was a narrow stone entrance. A rusted metal handle. A chain lock. Initial assumption? An old storm cellar. But the blueprint called it something else entirely: dredge access. A term usually used for industrial water management, not something you'd find at a Hollywood mansion. The Reiner estate was old, originally built in the 1930s and purchased by Rob in the early 2000s. According to city archives, it had undergone several remodels, but the dredge structure had never been demolished. It had been sealed, hidden, forgotten, or preserved inside the dredge. It took 2 hours and a bolt cutter to gain access. What officers found inside changed the entire investigation. The first thing to hit them wasn't what they saw, it was what they smelled. Decay. Old. Wet. Sour. A single bulb lit the entry corridor. Dust clung to cobwebs. Water dripped from rusted piping. Then came the first discovery: a pile of rotting canvas tarps. Underneath, bones. Human bones. Stacked. Arranged. Skulls intact. Not buried. Displayed. One officer reportedly vomited. Another called for hazmat suits. They found clothing fragments. Jewelry. A locket still intact. A woman's boot. Finger bones fused with leather as if the flesh had melted into the fabric before decomposition. And DNA results would later confirm. None of the bodies belonged to Rob, Michelle, or Nick. These were other victims. And the question now was no longer just who killed Rob and Michelle Reiner. It was, who else had died here, and why were their remains kept beneath the estate? What the Reiners didn't want anyone to see. Rob Reiner's public life was a masterclass in image control. He was vocal, political, charismatic, but never messy, never scandalous. But behind closed doors, the family had secrets. Old employees who left suddenly. Gardeners rotated every few months. Neighbors once reported midnight lights and strange digging, but were told landscaping upgrades were being done. Now, all those pieces started to look less innocent. And when detectives began questioning surviving family members, a troubling timeline began to emerge. Because just as the coroner zipped up the second body bag, a tech officer ran toward the team, breathless, holding a wiped flash drive recovered from Nick's guest house. He handed it over. And his words? "You're going to want to see what's on this." The flash drive was silver, unlabeled, just slightly scratched, like it had been carried around in someone's pocket for a long time. At first glance, it seemed like nothing. But when the tech team inserted it into a secure laptop, they didn't speak. They just stared. There was no folder structure, no password protection, just a single video file. Timestamp: 3 weeks before the murders. Title: Inheritance_test 3.mov. And the contents? Would drag this investigation into territory no one was ready for. The confession or the script. The video opened with static. Then, Nick, on screen, sitting in what looked like his guest house. Same layout, same furniture, same bed. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was talking past it, like someone else was there. Or maybe like he was talking to himself. "I'm documenting this now because no one will believe me after it happens," he said. A pause, a deep breath, then this. They don't see it. But the house, it knows. The garden knows. And the dredge, it's always known. What does that even mean? Was it a metaphor? A cry for help? Or was he speaking in code, like someone who had lived too long with secrets no one else could understand? Because what followed wasn't just a monologue. It was a story. Nick began narrating a plotline that, at first, sounded like a psychological horror screenplay. A tale of a family with a buried past. A father who collected things in the dark. A mother who looked the other way to protect what she loved. A sister who pretended nothing was wrong. And a son who knew too much. Halfway through the video, Nick looked straight at the lens and said, "What happens when the bones start talking?" Detectives freeze the frame. The team paused the video right there. Because in the background, barely visible, was a framed document hanging on the wall. Zooming in revealed the edge of a certificate. Handwriting analysts believe it was likely a rehab completion certificate. But the name on it? Not Nick's. The signature, when enhanced, resembled a different name entirely. One that has yet to be confirmed publicly. But sources say it's a woman's name. A name not previously connected to the family. Was it a past patient? A visitor? A secret resident? The drive may have contained only one video, but it raised 1,000 questions. The evidence starts stacking. Back inside the main house, forensic teams were uncovering more anomalies. There were fingerprints throughout the kitchen, but one set stood out. Not Rob's. Not Michelle's. Not Nick's. A fourth person, unidentified, who had been in the kitchen that night. The prints were found on the fridge handle, the stovetop, and, chillingly, on the knife handle. Who was this fourth person? And if they were there, are they still out there? The locket from the dredge. Remember the jewelry found with one of the bodies in the dredge? It was a silver heart-shaped locket, rusted shut. Inside was a photo, water-damaged, but partially visible. 2 girls, smiling, teenagers. One of the faces has been matched, tentatively, to a girl who went missing in the early 2000s. A girl who reportedly worked part-time as a dog walker in upscale LA neighborhoods. She vanished without a trace. Until now. The other girl in the photo? Still unidentified. But here's what will shake you. That missing girl had been reported seen on the Reiner property more than once, according to a 2002 Neighborhood Watch report. It was dismissed. The Reiners weren't suspects. They were respected, trusted, and that's how secrets rot, in silence. The garden speaks. Later that afternoon, cadaver dogs were brought to the estate. They circled the garden like they were tracing a memory. At one point, 2 dogs froze simultaneously over a patch of ivy behind a marble bench. Digging revealed nothing at first. Just soil. Then wood. A buried box. Inside, old newspaper clippings. Burned edges. Mostly unreadable. But one headline was still intact. Local girl disappears without a trace. Last seen near Brentwood. Dated August 9th, 2002. Why would someone hide that? Why bury a newspaper from decades ago? Was it guilt? A warning? Or a message? And most disturbing of all, why was that same story referenced, almost word for word, in Nick's unfinished screenplay? The screenplay, fact or fiction? Investigators began reading through Inheritance, Nick's final draft. It wasn't polished. It read like a scream from inside a padded room. But woven between the surreal scenes and erratic dialogue were moments that mirrored real events. A father character stabbed in the kitchen. A mother found face down on tile. A hidden room beneath the house containing artifacts of past lives. A character described as the sister calling the police after finding the bodies. Was it prophecy, confession, or both? Because the most haunting line in the script wasn't even dialogue. It was a single stage direction on the final page. Fade to black as the dredge opens, revealing what was never meant to see the light. Rob Reiner's silence. In the midst of all this chaos, one voice has remained notably quiet, Romi's. She hasn't spoken to the media. Her social media has gone dark. But a family friend told reporters this. Romi always knew something was wrong in that house. She used to say the guest house scared her at night. Another friend recalled a sleepover years ago where Romi refused to walk the garden alone after sunset. Why? What did she know? And did she come to the house that morning already fearing the worst? Nick Reiner's statement. In a brief moment during his arrest, as officers escorted him out of the guest house, Nick reportedly turned to one of them and said, "There's more in the dredge. You just have to dig deeper." Was that a metaphor? Or a warning? Because if there's more under the Reiner estate, what haven't we seen yet? And more importantly, who else is buried in Hollywood's forgotten corners? As night fell on the Reiner estate and investigators prepared to seal off the crime scene for the week, a young rookie officer radioed in a final report. He had discovered a second entrance to the dredge, a tunnel leading under the guest house. His voice cracked as he spoke. This wasn't just a hiding place. It was an access point. Someone's been using this recently. Who is Nick Reiner? Hollywood knew him, barely, as Rob Reiner's troubled son, a screenwriter, a recovering addict, a shadow in the glow of his famous father. But if you dig deeper, and that's exactly what we're about to do, you'll find a young man whose life was paved with contradictions, collapse, and cries for help that no one really wanted to answer. So let's ask the question that no one in Los Angeles ever wanted to say out loud. Was Nick Reiner a killer? Or was he something even more complicated? A witness? A participant? Or a survivor of something darker than anyone imagined? Let's go back to where it all began. The golden boy born in the shadow. Nick Reiner was born in 1993, the only son of Rob and Michelle Reiner. From birth, his life was one of luxury and scrutiny. Imagine trying to grow up in a house where your father's face was on every billboard, where every dinner party included Hollywood legends, where your last name wasn't just known, it was expected to mean something. But Nick was different. Quiet, observant, emotional. While Romy, younger by 5 years, embraced performance and activism, Nick gravitated toward darker corners. Horror films, obscure novels, strange role-playing games. A former tutor described him as a boy who wrote about death before he knew how to spell it properly. That line haunted us when we found it in a background report, because it speaks to a theme that follows Nick through every stage of his life, an obsession with endings. Early signs of trouble. At age 11, Nick was reportedly caught vandalizing the family guest house with red paint, drawing what looked like symbols or glyphs on the interior walls. The staff quietly painted over it. No report was filed. At 14, he was suspended from his elite prep school after allegedly threatening another student with a pocket knife. Again, no charges. Again, silenced. He was sent to Switzerland for discipline boarding. The kind of elite reform schools wealthy families use when they want to rehab their kids without headlines. And yet, the issues didn't fade. Nick's grades dropped. His social circle evaporated. And by 16, he had overdosed on prescription pills for the first time. The Reiners didn't speak publicly about it. They didn't have to. Because when you're a Hollywood family, your secrets don't vanish. They just get professionally buried. The script that wasn't a script. Fast forward to Nick's early 20s. After bouncing in and out of rehab facilities from Malibu to New Mexico, Nick reappeared with something new. A screenplay. Titled Being Charlie. It was a thinly veiled autobiographical tale about a privileged young man fighting addiction, identity, and familial pressure. Rob Reiner himself directed it. It premiered in 2015 at the Toronto International Film Festival. Critics were kind. The performances were raw. And behind the scenes, Nick was reportedly clean. But sources close to the family say something happened after the film's release. a downward spiral, one that never truly stopped. The re-entry into isolation. By 2020, Nick had disappeared from the public eye entirely. No film credits, no interviews, no appearances at family events. His Instagram went dormant. Paparazzi reported sightings of him around Brentwood, usually alone, always looking tired, pale, dazed. He'd moved into the guest house behind the family mansion, ostensibly for privacy. But sources now tell a different story. One former staff member told reporters anonymously, he wasn't just living there. He was being kept there. They described deliveries of medication, packages marked as therapy equipment, even a soundproof renovation done under the guise of podcast recording. But Nick never had a podcast. He had a recording room. And according to one document leaked from a family assistant, the room was locked from the outside. The journal pages no one was meant to read. In the weeks following the murder, police uncovered a number of spiral-bound journals from Nick's guest house. They weren't hidden. They were arranged. Some open-faced on desks, others placed on the bed, like they were left for someone to find. The entries were disturbing. Repetitive references to them watching me from the garden. Drawings of skeletal figures labeled keepers. Rantings about someone moving at night while he slept. A chilling line repeated across multiple pages. He told me I'd forget. He told me they'd forget. But the Dredge remembers everything. Was it fiction? Psychosis? Or evidence of a long-simmering truth? Because as investigators read deeper, one recurring theme emerged. Nick believed something had happened in the house. Something no one would talk about. Romy's role in Nick's story. Nick mentioned Romy more than once in his journals. Most references were tender. She's the only one who listens. She saw it too, even if she lies about it. But one entry stood out. It read, Romy said if I told, I'd ruin everything. She said Dad would never recover. But how can I sleep knowing what we buried? Let that sink in. What we buried. Was it metaphor? Or confession? And did Romy truly know more than she let on? Whispers from rehab. Following the murders, several individuals claiming to have met Nick in rehab over the years came forward online. One, using the handle at OldSoul86, said the following in a now-deleted tweet. Nick Reiner told me in 2018 that his dad used to walk the garden at night like he was searching for something. I thought it was nonsense. Now I'm not so sure. Another alleged former patient posted a blurred photo of a handwritten note Nick had slipped under their door. It said simply, don't trust the roots. They cover more than you think. Authorities have not confirmed the authenticity of these claims. But the timing? Chilling. The Dredge, again. It always circles back to the Dredge. That forgotten underground structure wasn't just a coincidence. It was central to Nick's writings. In one video file recovered from his laptop, Nick can be seen standing outside the hatch to the Dredge, filming himself. His tone, detached, calm, matter of fact. He says, it's not a grave. It's a library. Every time I go down there, I remember something new. At one point, he turns the camera to face the hatch. He touches the lock and says, they think locking it makes it disappear, but you can still hear it under the soil. Police believe this video was recorded just days before the murders. So here's the question. If Nick was so terrified of what was beneath the estate, why didn't he leave? Why live in the guest house? Why stay? Unless he wasn't the only one with a key. Unless he was watching someone else go in. So here's the twist. What if Nick wasn't just a danger to others, but also a witness to something he couldn't explain? What if, instead of the monster in the shadows, he was the one left alone, watching monsters walk free? Let's go back to Nick's final days before the murders. What was he doing? Who did he talk to? And what was hidden in that last unfinished script that law enforcement now believes may be more than just fiction? The Reiner dinner that never happened. According to leaked text messages between Romy and a family friend, the Reiners had planned a small family dinner the night before the murders. Nothing extravagant. Just Rob, Michelle, Nick, and Romy. A make-peace moment, as Romy allegedly described it. Nick had been out of rehab for nearly 10 months. The family was trying to rebuild. Or at least, that's how it looked from the outside. But the dinner never happened. At the last minute, Rob reportedly canceled, citing a stomach bug. Michelle backed out too. Romy, however, still showed up the next morning. Which begs the question, if the dinner never happened, why were 2 plates in the sink? Why was there a half-finished bottle of wine open on the table? And more chillingly, why were there 3 chairs pulled out? Nick's midnight call. Investigators traced a single outgoing phone call from Nick's phone the night before the murders. 11:42 p.m. The number was a burner, prepaid, untraceable. But what's significant is where the call pinged. The guest house. The same location he claimed he hadn't left all night. The call lasted 4 minutes. And then, silence. Nick never mentioned it during police questioning. But his laptop browser history showed something peculiar. A Google search at 11:55 p.m. for, how long does it take for blood to clot at room temperature? Let that sink in. Was this premeditation? Or was he preparing to cover for someone else's crime? Nick's unfinished script, inheritance. Let's talk about the script one more time. Because police found something else buried in the final pages of inheritance, something they almost missed. Folded between 2 pages, barely hanging onto the binding, was a handwritten note. Not typed, not scripted, just a scribbled sentence in red pen. What's buried doesn't sleep. It waits. That same sentence also appeared in Nick's journal. Twice. One time in all caps. One time underlined. It's not a throwaway line. It's a refrain, the kind of line you repeat when it's not just story, but memory. And here's the kicker. In the margins of page 78, Nick had scrawled 4 initials. MR, TB, CJ, LR. None of them match anyone in the immediate family. But one of those initials, TB, matches a real person. Tina Barnes, a part-time maid who worked for the Reiners in 2001. She disappeared in May of that year. Case still open. Police are now investigating whether one of the skeletons found in the dredge belongs to her. The father-son relationship, darker than anyone knew. Now let's go somewhere hard. Let's talk about Rob and Nick's relationship. Because on the surface, it was always presented as rocky, but loving. In reality, it was volatile. A former family therapist, speaking under condition of anonymity, told reporters. Rob loved Nick, but he also feared what Nick would reveal if he ever spiraled. What did he mean by that? Well, police found multiple legal documents stored in Rob's private safe. Most were estate-related. Contracts, trust fund details. But one stood out. A confidential settlement agreement. Dated 2017. A payout to a former live-in staff member. The reason? The document was vague. Just one phrase repeated. Breach of confidentiality regarding domestic concerns. Who was the staffer? Why were they paid? And why was Rob hiding the paperwork? Unless, just maybe, he was trying to keep something from resurfacing. Romy and the email that vanished. Then there's Romy. Sweet. Quiet. Artistic. The daughter who always seemed untouched by the chaos. But according to a forensic report of the family's iCloud archive, an email was sent from Romy's account to a lawyer just 6 days before the murders. The subject line? My brother needs help, and I don't trust Dad to give it. The email was deleted minutes after it was sent, but the server kept a backup. And that single line gives us a glimpse into something far more complicated than the media ever saw. A daughter caught between loyalty and fear. A son slowly unraveling in silence. And a father, possibly controlling it all. Nick's final journal entry. The last page of Nick's journal, dated the day of the murder, read, "They said healing would come with truth. But truth isn't allowed here. Truth is chained like the rest of us." He ended it with one word, all caps, written in pen so heavy it bled through 3 pages. Enough. Some will say it was the writing of a madman. But others? They'll say it was a whistleblower, a survivor, a broken child finally snapping under the weight of secrets buried too deep. And remember, the tunnel under the dredge wasn't sealed. It was used recently, which means this story isn't over, not by a long shot. As one detective reviewed the files late into the night, she noticed a strange folder on Nick's encrypted hard drive. Hidden, protected, titled simply, The Others. She clicked it open. Inside, 8 video files. 7 were labeled with initials. But the 8th? It was titled, Romy_final.mov. How well do you think you really know someone? Not the version they show on TV. Not the charming late-night guest. Not the advocate on political panels or the director behind the camera. The real version. The version behind locked doors. In hushed conversations. When the spotlight fades and only family is watching. Because if you asked most people to describe Rob Reiner, they'd use words like visionary, progressive, Hollywood royalty. But now, the word being whispered behind the velvet curtains? Complicit, possibly even worse. Because behind the smile, the legacy, the interviews filled with passion and purpose, there may have been something deeply broken. And no one, not his fans, not even his friends, were ready to face it. The carefully constructed image. Rob Reiner built a life most people would envy. Born into the comedy dynasty of Carl Reiner, Rob was practically raised on sound stages. He was a sitcom star by his 30s, a critically acclaimed director by his 40s, a political force in Hollywood by his 50s. He was the kind of man who could call up Martin Scorsese one moment and campaign for social justice the next. People respected him, not just for his films, but for how he spoke. Passionately, decisively, with authority. He was the guy who stood up for gay marriage before it was popular, who funded documentaries exposing disinformation, who took on big tobacco in the 90s. A hero in many eyes. But heroes, as we know, often build their image on the one thing that keeps the truth out. Control. The silence in the guest house. Several people who worked for the Reiners over the years have since come forward, anonymously. They described the guest house not just as a place Nick lived, but as a place Rob managed. One former assistant said, Nick wasn't living there independently. It was monitored. Rob had the only second key. A live-in cook, who worked for the family during the early 2010s, shared an even more chilling anecdote. Every night at 10, Rob would walk the garden. Always alone. Sometimes for 30 minutes, sometimes longer. He said it helped him think. But one time, I heard him whispering. It wasn't prayer. It was like he was talking to someone. Who was he talking to? Or was it not someone, but something? Was there already something buried on that property that only Rob knew about? Michelle's isolation. What about Michelle Reiner? To the outside world, she was a quiet humanitarian, a philanthropist who largely stayed behind the scenes. Devoted to Rob, always smiling beside him. But behind the scenes, friends say she had changed. Dramatically. One friend, speaking under a pseudonym, said, she started becoming paranoid. She stopped going to dinner parties. She said people were watching them. Michelle allegedly kept 2 journals. One was found by police in her bedroom. The other? Still missing. And here's the twist. Michelle's final entry, dated 3 days before her death, ended with this line. He's lying again. About the noise. About the lights. About the tunnel. Rob? Nick? Or someone else? Who was he? And what noise? What tunnel? We know now, from Chapter 1, that there was a tunnel. A sealed dredge access leading from the guest house to an underground chamber. So was Michelle trying to tell someone something? Was she preparing to expose a secret Rob had kept for years? Friends in high places, secrets in low spaces. Rob wasn't just powerful in Hollywood. He was connected. He sat on the boards of major organizations. He had lunch with governors. His circle included senators, tech billionaires, and industry insiders. If Rob wanted to bury something, figuratively or literally, he had the reach to make it disappear. A former entertainment lawyer, who once represented a case involving Rob indirectly, said, he never got messy. Not publicly. If someone came forward with a problem, he'd make a donation. If someone threatened exposure, they got a job offer, or a contract that never made it to press. But what happens when the secret isn't a PR disaster? What if it's criminal? Or worse, corpse-level criminal? The settlement nobody noticed. A stunning detail emerged from a locked filing cabinet discovered in Rob's private home office. Inside were dozens of signed documents. NDA agreements, assistant contracts, legal drafts. But one folder, dated 2004, stood out. It was labeled, Employee Incident, Brentwood Case, Closed. The document inside was a legal release. A female staffer, name redacted. She had allegedly filed an internal complaint regarding a disturbing discovery in the rear utility structure. She described a smell. She described bones. She was paid a one-time settlement of $135,000. Then dismissed. No lawsuit. No headlines. No police report. The signature on the payment? Rob Reiner. The Romy_final.mov file, a ticking time bomb. Let's circle back to the video file. When investigators opened Romy_final.mov, what they found stunned even the lead detective. It wasn't Romy on camera. It was Rob, recording himself. At night. In the garden. He's pacing. He's sweating. He's whispering into the camera. She's going to tell them. She thinks I don't know, but she's writing it down. And if she shows them, everything falls apart. Was he talking about Michelle? Romy? Someone else? Then, abruptly, he stops. He turns the camera off. End of file. But forensic analysts were able to recover deleted frames from the beginning. Just 3 seconds. And in those 3 seconds, the camera is pointed at a wall. A concrete wall, with a name etched into it. Half erased, but still readable. Tina Barnes. The missing maid from 2001. The body count behind the smile. If what the investigators are uncovering is accurate, if the bones in the dredge match known missing persons, then we're looking at a case far beyond a family tragedy. We're looking at a serial pattern, a legacy of violence buried beneath the Reiner brand. And Rob? He may have directed heartwarming stories like The Bucket List, but the list under his home was something far colder. Because just as the digital team prepared to shut down Rob's private server, a final encrypted email was decrypted. It was dated 5 years ago. Sent from Rob's private account to an address titled w.caretaker@protonmail.com. The subject line? Tunnel compromised. She's asking too many questions. The message body? Just 2 words. Fix it. That was the question detectives kept circling like vultures over an untouched crime scene. Fix what? The broken marriage? The paranoid wife? The unstable son? Or was it something darker? Something buried? Something breathing, metaphorically, or maybe even literally, beneath the surface of the Brentwood estate? Because now, with a decrypted message to someone called W.Caretaker, everything changed. The tunnel, the dredge, the missing persons, the bodies, the unspoken history. It was no longer a theory. It was infrastructure. And whoever the caretaker was, they were a missing link the Reiner family had kept hidden for decades. The caretaker nobody knew about. Let's talk about this phantom, caretaker. The email address. Created through Proton Mail, a secure encrypted service often used by whistleblowers and, more worryingly, criminals, was untraceable by conventional means. No name, no verified phone, no financial info tied to it. But metadata doesn't lie. Digital forensics found something tucked in the headers of that email, a device ID. Buried, but not impossible to trace. That device ID matched a burner phone found in a separate storage locker. One rented in the name of Franklin Weathers, a man Rob Reiner allegedly hired back in 2003 to maintain the grounds. There's no public record of Franklin Weathers working for Rob, but payroll slips recovered from old QuickBooks software showed monthly payments to a contractor listed only as Groundskeeper from 2003 to 2022, almost 20 years. And during that time, 4 individuals connected to the Brentwood estate went missing. Coincidence? Or careful removal? The missing 4. Let's walk through the names. Tina Barnes, 22, part-time cleaner, vanished in 2001. Allegedly last seen on the Reiner property, according to a tip never followed up on. Louise Contreras, 45, landscaper, worked for several wealthy Brentwood families. Last known paycheck came from a business entity tied to Reiner's film company. Disappeared in 2007. Cheryl Denning, 34, hired as a night nurse for Michelle's mother, who briefly stayed in the guest house in 2012. Never completed her contract. Last seen entering the estate, never exiting. Omar Vasquez, 29, hired in 2018 as security. Title was vague. He reportedly told friends he watched the tunnel and joked about being the family shadow. His remains have not been found, but his tattooed arm was recovered from the dredge. One tattoo, the word Silencio. Police confirmed that matches Omar's left forearm, as seen in a 2017 Instagram post. That's 4 people, spanning nearly 2 decades, all connected to one property. All silenced. And behind it all, a man who directed feel-good blockbusters and shook hands with presidents. The tunnel isn't just a tunnel. We now know the tunnel beneath the Reiner estate wasn't just some old relic. It was maintained. Recent scuff marks, new boards, fresh nails, repaired hinges. Someone had been using it. Investigators found makeshift shelving inside, rusted tools, rope, a bucket filled with what appeared to be chemically stained cloth, and worst of all, a set of surgical gloves, still damp, fresh enough to suggest activity within the past 48 hours of the murders. Meaning one of two things. Nick didn't act alone, or Nick didn't act at all. Rob's connection to the 2003 double homicide. Let's rewind to something that got quietly buried in Los Angeles police records. In 2003, two young documentary filmmakers, Melissa Hayes and Jonathan Chris, were murdered in their apartment in Echo Park. Brutally stabbed. Apartment trashed. Hard drives missing. The case was considered a robbery gone wrong. But here's the eerie part. Their last known project? A short-form documentary titled, Behind the Mansion Walls. It was an exposé on how the ultra-rich conceal illegal activities within their own estates, through tunnels, private guards, secret holding rooms. Guess which Brentwood property their film included in draft footage? The Reiner estate. One of the cameramen who worked on that project came forward after the recent murders. He claimed the Reiners were not happy about being included, even in a speculative way. Allegedly, Rob's team issued a legal warning before the film was completed. Shortly after, the documentary was abandoned. And then, Melissa and Jonathan were dead, officially unrelated. But now, every investigator on the case is asking, was that documentary the first attempt to expose what was buried, literally, under Rob Reiner's Hollywood image? Michelle's silent rebellion. While all this was happening, we can't forget Michelle Reiner. Because although she remained quiet publicly, she may have been the one person trying to break free. We now know she was keeping two journals. One was found in her nightstand. The other, recovered from a hidden drawer in her art studio, paints a darker, more desperate picture. Excerpts include, "He won't let Nick leave. He says the world would eat him alive. But the truth is, this house is what's devouring him. I hear the floor creak when I'm alone. But he says it's the wind. Always the wind." Romy asked about the lock. I lied. I couldn't tell her what I saw last fall. I couldn't even say the word. One page has just two words, written over and over. The caretaker. The caretaker. The caretaker. Who was this man? Was he living on the estate? In the tunnel? Paid by Rob to silence and disappear people? And if so, where is he now? Because as of today, Franklin Weathers is still missing. What the public never saw. On talk shows, Rob was a smile machine. Warm, quick-witted, unshakably composed. But several people who worked in post-production on his later films noticed a change in the 2010s. He became distant, edgy, and obsessed with security. One editor recalled that Rob once stormed into a sound mix session and demanded the windows be blacked out. Another claimed that Rob installed surveillance cameras not just on the studio lot, but in the sound booths themselves. Why? What was he watching? Or more terrifying, what was he afraid someone might say? Nick knew something. We can't escape this final point. Because whatever the truth is, Nick knew it. He wrote about it. He filmed it. He left clues scattered across journals, scripts, USB drives, and even audio files, one of which investigators are still decrypting. One titled, Dad Said We're All Guilty. MOV. Which brings us back to the beginning. That haunting image of a family portrait. Shattered on the floor, glass cracked, frame broken, faces frozen in false smiles. Nick, Romy, Michelle, Rob. For people who played the part of a happy, successful Hollywood family. But only two walked out of that house alive. And only one might hold the key to everything. Because just as investigators were preparing to seal the tunnel, a new officer uncovered something buried in the far wall. A locked metal box. Inside it, 7 plastic ID cards. 6 belonged to former staff. But the 7th? Belonged to someone still alive. Romy. What was Romy's ID doing inside a locked metal box buried behind a concrete wall, inside an underground tunnel, connected to the dredge? That was the question nobody at LAPD had an answer for. Not yet. But that plastic badge, worn and weathered, with the name R. Reiner stamped across it, was about to turn this case on its head. Because it meant one thing. She'd been down there. And if Romy had been inside the dredge, the public version of events, where she discovered the bodies and called police in horror, was no longer the whole truth. So what was she doing in a place only the caretaker and Nick were thought to access? And more importantly, what had she seen? Let's talk about the dredge. By now, you know the basics. A hidden underground space, located behind the Reiner estate, sealed off by overgrowth and a rusted lock. Discovered accidentally after the murders. But the term dredge wasn't just some obscure nickname. It had a specific meaning in the original blueprints. Recovered architectural records dated back to 1934, when the estate was first built, not as a home, but as a private recovery facility for high-profile patients suffering from addiction, trauma, and, in at least one case, psychosis. The dredge was originally listed as a seclusion chamber. In plain English, a place to put the broken people, to keep them out of sight. And according to the blueprints, it included 2 rooms with reinforced doors, a drainage channel running beneath the main floor, a steel containment hatch, a secondary entrance connecting to what is now the Reiner guest house. Over the years, the space was reportedly filled in, sealed, forgotten, until Rob bought the property and reopened it. Why reopen a seclusion chamber? The million-dollar question. Why would a beloved Hollywood director spend hundreds of thousands quietly refurbishing a forgotten underground chamber originally used to isolate patients? Was it curiosity, a twisted sense of preservation, or something more functional? One contractor who worked on the property in 2006 under the alias JT claims he was hired to install reinforced steel braces in a basement-like structure. He said this in a recent interview. There was nothing down there but rot, concrete, and old bones. It was like something from a wartime bunker. But Reiner was specific: seal the top, reinforce the walls, and never mention it. Never mention it. That phrase came up again. In Michelle's journal. In Nick's script. Even in one of the caretaker's encrypted emails. Never mention it. What was it? What were they hiding? A chilling new discovery. Forensic teams returned to the dredge 2 days after the tunnel was uncovered. This time, they brought ground-penetrating radar. The results? Shocking. Beneath the dredge floor were 2 additional voids. Hidden cavities. Buried and filled in with what appeared to be lime-based cement, a substance commonly used in human decomposition management. Inside one of the voids, fragments of clothing, a child's shoe, and what appeared to be the shattered remains of a pair of eyeglasses. Inside the other, a partial skeleton. Female. Approximate age, mid-teens. Not Michelle. Not a staff member. Someone else. Possibly someone Romy's age. Who was she? DNA testing is still underway, but speculation is already rampant. Some believe she may have been one of the undocumented workers hired off-record in the 2000s. Others believe she was a friend of Romy's. Or, as one unconfirmed theory suggests, the sibling. That's right. There's a theory now being floated by armchair detectives that Rob and Michelle may have had another child. A firstborn. One never registered. One who disappeared before Romy was old enough to remember her. Is there evidence? Nothing conclusive. But Michelle's recovered studio journal had this cryptic entry. I hear her in the garden. I don't remember her name. That's the worst part. But I hear her. Another page reads, we told Romy she was a dream. But sometimes I wake up wondering if we buried her too deep. That's not metaphor. That's confession-level language. And if true, then this case isn't just about murder. It's about erased lives. The dredge as a vault. Investigators describe the main room of the dredge as architecturally impossible. What does that mean? It means someone had intentionally modified it, over the years, to serve a purpose. The walls were padded in parts, insulated in others. The lighting was battery-powered, not wired. There was a ventilation system routed through a fake well shaft in the yard. And worst of all, the floor had been dug out and refilled multiple times. Layer upon layer, year after year, as if someone were storing things, hiding things, or discarding them. And buried within those layers, they found 6 rings, 4 wallets, 2 children's bracelets, a black leather dog collar. None of them matched any current missing persons cases, at least not yet, but every one of them is now logged as evidence of potential serial activity. And all of it was literally beneath a Hollywood legend's backyard. What about Romy's ID? So we circle back. The badge. The plastic, worn security card bearing Romy Reiner's name. It was real. Issued in 2018. Found in a locked box. With 6 others. All belonging to deceased or missing staff. Which raises the haunting question. Was Romy meant to be the 7th? Was there a list? A pattern? Or was she down there willingly, before everything unraveled? And if she had been in the dredge, when? Why? And what had she been told? Because either Romy knew the full truth and stayed silent, or she was meant to disappear, but escaped just in time. As forensics bagged the final item from the dredge, a rusted, blood-stained key, they realized it matched nothing on the estate. Not the guest house, not the tunnel, not the dredge itself. It matched a door no one had yet found. But then a cadaver dog stopped near the fountain, began barking, digging, sniffing toward the stone base. And that's when an officer whispered, "This isn't a fountain, it's a cover." The moment those words were spoken, every investigator on site froze. A cover? To what? The fountain, lavish, marble, Baroque in style, had long been one of the Reiner estate's most photographed landmarks. It appeared in old interviews, lifestyle shoots, even in Rob's holiday cards. A tranquil centerpiece. But now, it was screaming to be seen for what it really was. A disguise. Beneath the spray of stone cherubs and the gentle gurgle of recycled water, something ancient and sinister had been hiding. And with one loosened slab of granite, wedged by a crowbar, truth began to ooze out. The forgotten vault. Underneath the fountain was a metal hatch. Corroded, sealed with industrial-strength bolts. No rust on the hinges, meaning it had been maintained. Maybe even used recently. It took 3 hours, 2 welders, and the authorization of a homicide lieutenant to force it open. What they found? A spiral staircase descending into pitch darkness. This wasn't part of any blueprint. Not city records. Not Reiner's personal remodeling files. Not even in the recovered documents from Rob's locked safe. Someone had built this off the books. And that someone had made sure it would never be found, unless you were looking. The descent. Investigators descended the narrow stairwell in full gear, ventilators, floodlights, gloves. Each step echoed. Not like metal, like bone on stone. The air changed, grew colder, wetter, almost humid. The stairwell ended at a steel door. Smooth. Sealed. Etched into it. A date. December 23rd, 1989. The significance? Nobody knew. Yet. But next to the date, scratched faintly into the metal, was a single word. Feed. The basement feed tape. Back at headquarters, forensic techs had been scanning and restoring tapes recovered from a wooden trunk in Rob's home office. Among them, VHS tapes labeled with years and generic titles. 1985 Party, Nick's 7th birthday, Dailies, Princess Bride. But one stood out. A plain black tape. No case. No label. Just a strip of masking tape across the spine with the words, 1989, basement feed. It had been badly degraded, molded, melted in parts. But when the tech team finally got it to play, what appeared on screen stunned them. It wasn't a party. It wasn't a rehearsal. It was surveillance. The video that shouldn't exist. Grainy. Black and white. Static flickering in the corners. The feed showed a narrow room. Concrete floors. A table. A single chair. The timestamp in the corner matched the etching on the metal door beneath the fountain. December 23rd, 1989. On screen, a girl. Approximately 13 to 15 years old. Dark hair. Thin frame. Wearing hospital scrubs. She wasn't talking. She was pacing. Back and forth. Back and forth. Until the camera tilted, manually. That's what made everyone freeze. The camera was being controlled in real time. Which means someone was watching. Then, a man's voice. Off-screen. Just a few words. Tell them again what you saw. The girl flinched. Then silence. The tape cut out. Who was the girl? Investigators scrubbed the footage frame by frame. One blurry shot captured her face in partial light. It didn't match Romy. It didn't match any known child actors in the Reiner family. But a forensic artist generated a digital composite, aged backward and forward. And here's where it gets horrifying. The aged-up composite bore a striking resemblance to one of the women found in the dredge. The body with the silver locket. The girl missing since the early 2000s. Could she have been kept down there? Alive for years? Was she one of the staff? Or was she something else entirely? A relative? A runaway? A test subject? Because remember, the estate was once a recovery facility. But what if, under Rob's control, it became a containment facility? The vault's true purpose. Back under the fountain, the newly discovered room was mapped and documented. What they found inside was unlike anything investigators had seen. Steel shackles, bolted to the floor. Medical records dated 1987 to 1991. A table with restraints. A logbook with initials, dates, and times. A jar containing human teeth. One officer, who had worked gang and homicide for 19 years, reportedly exited the chamber and vomited in the grass. The logbook contained over 40 entries. The handwriting was not Rob's. But one signature matched Rob's known assistant in the 1980s, a man named David Leland, now deceased. His last known address? A caretaker's cottage near the edge of the estate, one that had been torn down in 1995. Nick's journal entry makes sense now. Nick's journal, previously dismissed as drug-fueled rambling, contained one line that, in hindsight, now reads like the thesis of everything. The fountain isn't for water. It's for weight. It holds the past down. He knew. He'd either seen the door beneath it or been told, possibly by Michelle, or by Romy, or by someone else who didn't survive. The myth of the good man. If what's being uncovered is true, if the Reiner estate was a front for decades of abuse, imprisonment, and possibly experimentation, then we are witnessing the collapse of more than a family legacy. We're watching the destruction of a myth. Rob Reiner, the icon, the progressive champion, the man who stood at rallies and wept for justice. He may have been one thing in the light, and something else entirely in the dark. A man obsessed with control, a man who may have inherited more than wealth and fame from his father's generation, perhaps a philosophy, a belief that some things are better left buried. But the truth never stays buried forever. As tech teams scoured the last corner of the underground vault, a rusted filing cabinet was uncovered. Inside, a single folder, unmarked. Inside that folder, a black and white photo of a teenage girl strapped to a chair, a page from a psych evaluation dated 1989, a handwritten note on Rob Reiner's personal letterhead. It read, "No one can ever see this, not even Michelle."